Welcome to the Shadows of Fear channel, a space where shadows become present, where reality and the paranormal merge, and where the most unsettling stories come to life. Today, in this special episode, we will delve into a realm where the sacred and the spectral meet, Holy Week, a time when, in many cultures, spirituality reaches its peak. But also, it's a time when shadows seem to gain strength, and the boundaries between the divine and the supernatural blur. If you're new to our channel, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes, because here on Echoes of Fear, there's always something that will make you think twice before turning off the light. And of course, we invite you to leave your comments, your thoughts, and if you have any paranormal experiences to share, don't hesitate to send them to us. Your story might just be the next one to be told here. So if you're ready, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and join me on this journey full of mystery and chills. This is a tour through the paranormal events surrounding Holy Week, a journey where the inexplicable takes center stage. Holy Week is undoubtedly one of the most significant periods for millions of people around the world. The commemoration of Christ's passion, death, and resurrection solemnly fills the days leading up to Easter, but it also awakens a unique energy. A sense of devotion, prayer, and reflection permeates the streets, churches, and of course, the hearts of the faithful. However, it's not just devotion and faith that intensify during this time. The paranormal, the inexplicable, also seems to find space beyond the visible. Some popular beliefs state that during Holy Week, the lines between the divine and the spectral become incredibly thin. It is said that the spirits of those who have departed during this period, or even those who tragically lost their lives in ancient times, return to visit this world. As if the energy of the commemoration and the mysticism surrounding Holy Week opened a door to the beyond. In some cultures, it is common to hear stories of visions and strange apparitions that occur in the days leading up to Easter. Accounts of people who have seen religious figures that weren't there, or even spiritual beings who, on an ordinary night, cross the path of the believers, as if the vigil of these days brings with it a strange mix of the divine and the terrifying. Sometimes, they are lights that seem to move through the air in the darkness of the night. Other times, they are blurry shadows sliding between the columns of empty churches, giving the impression that religion itself is being watched, or that an invisible force is present during the celebrations. Occasionally, the testimonies are even more terrifying. Apparitions of religious figures who, according to those who have seen them, don't belong to this world. Some claim to have witnessed the Virgin Mary or even Jesus walking among the rows of the faithful, while others speak of seeing figures wrapped in ancient robes, with an unmistakable presence, gliding down the aisles of churches as night falls. While these accounts may be interpreted as manifestations of faith, they could also be the reflection of something much more inexplicable. Something that hides behind the words of those who have lived the encounter, like a distant echo from a world beyond human understanding. Historically, testimonies dating back centuries exist, from times when religion, superstition, and popular beliefs were intertwined. During Holy Week, it is said that some people have had strange visions, especially when they were in a deep state of prayer, which makes us question whether these experiences are the fruits of faith or if we are truly touching a door to another plane of existence. Could it be that by focusing on the sacred, our senses become heightened to perceive what we normally can't see? Or could it be that during this time, so full of symbolism and mystery, the forces from beyond are especially drawn to us? Undoubtedly, something happens during this period that awakens the inexplicable. In the next segment, we will explore in more detail the accounts of paranormal encounters during the processions and in churches, places traditionally dedicated to worship and adoration, but that, under certain circumstances, become the setting for mysterious phenomena. But before that, I'd like to hear your thoughts, dear listener. Do you believe that Holy Week has a special connection to the supernatural? If you've had any experiences or heard any intriguing stories related to these days, share them with us in the comments. Your story could be the next one brought to life on this channel. Now stay with us, because what's coming next will be even more fascinating. We'll be diving into empty churches, processions, and legends that have endured for centuries. Don't go anywhere. Holy Week is a time when churches are filled with devotion, prayer, and reflection, but also with mystery. It's a period when the spiritual burden of the believers and the intensity of the ceremonies open, in a way, a door between worlds. During these days, the sacred seems closer to the paranormal than ever before, and popular beliefs attest to this. History and tradition have marked this time of year as a moment when the boundaries between the divine and the spectral become blurred, making Holy Week not just a religious event, but also a period full of inexplicable phenomena. These beliefs are not recent. They've been forged over centuries, fueled by the testimonies of those who claim to have experienced the inexplicable. But why is this period so closely linked to the paranormal? Let's unravel that connection. Popular beliefs about the between the divine and the spectral. The idea that the divine and the spectral can mix during times of great spiritual intensity is not exclusive to Holy Week. For centuries, cultures around the world have considered that periods of prayer and reflection, like those that characterize this time, are moments when the barriers between the living and the dead, between the physical and the spiritual, become more fragile. It's no coincidence that many religions have celebrations focused on connecting with the departed, meditation, or the search for transcendence during times of great significance. Holy Week, as we know, is one of those periods full of rituals and prayers, but also of mystery. In many cultures across Europe and Latin America, Holy Week is not only related to the death and resurrection of Christ, but also to the spirits of the dead. It's said that the dead, especially those who died violently or tragically, return in the days leading up to Easter. This belief is reflected in various popular stories that speak of ghostly figures appearing in churches or on lonely paths. In some regions, it's even believed that during Holy Week, the gates of heaven open, and the souls of the departed can walk among the living for a short period. Additionally, the well-known belief that the souls of the dead do not rest fully until Easter Sunday is deeply connected to the idea that invisible forces are active throughout Holy Week. For instance, in some communities, it's said that during the vigils on Good Friday night, the souls of the penitents return to seek forgiveness. These beliefs, often combined with traditional rituals like cleaning graves or leaving offerings, have also been the origin of numerous legends about the return of souls. Historical testimonies of visions and apparitions. During this time, if we take a closer look at historical testimonies, we see that apparitions or visions during Holy Week are not something new. Throughout the centuries, there have been numerous accounts of people who, in moments of deep devotion or amid processions and rituals, have claimed to have had visions of religious figures or presences that don't belong to this world. One of the best-known cases is that of Saint Teresa of Avila, who, in several of her writings, described mystical experiences during Holy Week. During these days, she felt the presence of Christ or the saints in such a palpable way that reality seemed to dissolve before her eyes. Although her visions were not necessarily seen as paranormal manifestations at the time, they give us an idea of how the supernatural was integrated into the religious experience. On the other hand, there are more recent testimonies, even within our own communities. People who, during Good Friday processions, have experienced moments when an inexplicable figure appears in the crowd or in empty churches, shadows that seem to move with a supernatural grace. These stories are not isolated. They repeat year after year in various parts of the world. The fact that the people involved in these accounts are ordinary individuals with no hidden interests or reasons to lie gives these experiences a certain credibility. On several occasions, these testimonies have been documented in books about the paranormal. Some authors argue that large concentrations of spiritual energy, like those that occur during Holy Week, could be the key to these inexplicable manifestations. Others suggest that the divine and the paranormal are intrinsically connected, and that during these moments of intense faith and devotion, people become more sensitive to shifts in the spiritual atmosphere. This theory could explain the strange experiences of those who, while in prayer, have felt a connection to other worlds or even seen figures or lights in the air. The myth of the ghostly penitents. One myth that frequently appears in the popular legends of Holy Week is that of the ghostly penitents. In various parts of Latin America, it's said that during Holy Week, penitents who have died in the past return in the form of shadows, covered in their traditional robes. In some stories, these penitents are described as faceless figures who silently follow the processions, carrying with them an air of mystery and an unsettling presence. It's believed that these penitents were people who lived in past times, perhaps those who committed great sins or died tragically, and now return on the eve of Easter to fulfill a penance or warn the living of the danger of falling into temptation. This myth has been passed down through generations and has been a recurring theme in oral legends that circulate during Holy Week. The shadows of the penitents are believed to be like wandering souls, seeking redemption or eternal rest, but trapped in a cycle that only the light of resurrection can break. The fact that these legends endure in popular culture shows how Holy Week is much more than a religious celebration. For many, it has become a period of purification and, at the same time, a time when the spirits of the dead emerge from the beyond. Testimonies of encounters with the paranormal during Holy Week. What really adds weight to these beliefs are the accounts of people who claim to have had paranormal encounters during Holy Week. Often, these testimonies arise in situations of great emotional and spiritual charge. One of the most common experiences occurs in churches. Many claim to have felt invisible presences, heard whispers in the darkest corners, or even seen figures in the shadows of the aisles. Some believers have experienced the sensation that the air becomes denser, as if something is present, watching. These encounters are not limited to churches. They are also reported during processions. As the religious images pass by, people have reported seeing dark figures, as if someone were following them, or even feeling an inexplicable cold. In many cases, these events happen during moments of deep spiritual concentration, which makes the experience even more intense for those who live it. This type of testimony is often passed down from generation to generation, further feeding the myth that Holy Week is a time of special vulnerability to the paranormal. In conclusion, the connection between the sacred and the paranormal during Holy Week is not simply a matter of popular beliefs or superstitions. It is deeply rooted in the human experience, in our ability to perceive the inexplicable during moments of great transcendence. During Holy Week, when people fully dedicate themselves to prayer and reflection, they seem more receptive to the mysteries of the beyond. Whether it's the strength of faith or the unique atmosphere that surrounds this time, what's clear is that Holy Week is not only a time for meditation on the life and death of Christ, but also a period in which the paranormal emerges from the darkness, intertwining with the divine inextricably. In the next few minutes, we will explore more stories and experiences that seem to confirm this mysterious connection between the sacred and the paranormal, delving even deeper into the legends and apparitions that haunt the churches and processions. But before we continue, I want to invite you to reflect. Have you ever experienced something inexplicable during these days of devotion? If you have a story to share, don't hesitate to leave it in the comments. Your testimony could be the next to become part of this journey into the unknown. Now, let's talk about spectral encounters in churches and processions. Holy Week, in its magnificence, is not only defined by sacred rituals, prayers, and solemn processions. It has also become, over the centuries, a time conducive to the inexplicable. It is in the empty churches, in the hallways of ancient temples, and in the dark processions where legends come to life, and where the spectral seems to walk among the living. One of the most fascinating and terrifying aspects of Holy Week is how many testimonies of paranormal encounters originate in these places, full of history, devotion, and religious fervor. Stories of figures slipping inside empty churches or of apparitions during processions are more common than one might think. But what truly sparks curiosity and mystery is the why of these phenomena and what makes them so recurrent during this time of year. The churches, with their solemn atmosphere and heavy symbolism, are sacred spaces that for many represent a refuge for peace and reflection. However, for others, churches become settings for strange, inexplicable, and often terrifying encounters. During Holy Week, stories of strange presences in empty temples multiply. It is said that, in moments of deep devotion, when the lights are dimmed and silence takes over the place, shadows can be seen moving between the pews, ethereal figures gliding through the aisles with a disconcerting speed. These stories are not limited to a single region or country. In Spain, for example, the tradition of Holy Week processions, with their religious images covered in veils, their slow steps, and their emotionally charged atmosphere, has led to countless stories of shadows moving unsettlingly through churches while the faithful pray. Some even claim to have seen figures seemingly emerging from the walls, as if the spirits of ancient believers or historical figures had returned to accompany the devotion of the living. In some cases, witnesses say they felt a tangible presence, a cold air surrounding the figure, as if an entity were watching from the shadows. In Latin America, particularly in countries like Mexico, Guatemala, and Peru, similar stories circulate. In the ancient colonial churches dating back to the 16th and 17th centuries, people have claimed to see mysterious figures of monks or priests walking silently between the columns of the temples, disappearing into the shadows. Some of these testimonies come from people visiting the churches for the first time, who, while in the middle of prayer, feel that they are not alone. At times, the figures are not directly seen, but are sensed through the movements of shadows cast by the candles, or by the reflection of light in the stained glass windows. A notable testimony comes from a priest who, during a Mass on the early morning of Holy Thursday, claimed to have seen a figure moving through the church while he was celebrating the Eucharist. The figure, wearing a white robe, disappeared without a trace, and the priest, visibly disturbed, could not explain what had happened. This type of experience repeats year after year, and although many try to find rational explanations, the coincidence of the testimonies close to Easter leaves the door open for speculation. Could it be that the souls of those who have deeply experienced Holy Week return to pay homage to the sacred, or is there something beyond our understanding that manifests during this period? The processions, with their solemn and mystical character, are another point where the paranormal seems to make its presence known. In many cultures, Holy Week is marked by processions in which religious figures, surrounded by candles and chants, advance through the streets in a dense and emotionally charged atmosphere. But, in addition to being an act of faith, processions have also become a recurring setting for stories of inexplicable apparitions. One of the most well-known legends of Holy Week takes place in the city of Seville, Spain, during the famous Madrugada, one of the most important processions of Andalusian Holy Week. It is said that, During one of the processions, a group of penitents observed a figure moving through the shadows, preceding the image of the Virgin of Macarena. The figure was not recognized by anyone, but its presence was felt so strongly that some of the penitents left the procession, visibly disturbed. Others claimed to have seen a figure at the back of the crowd, walking with slow and stealthy steps, as if it were part of the procession, but not actually a part of it. Cases like this have been documented throughout the centuries. During processions in other Latin American countries, such as Colombia and Venezuela, there have been reports of figures who don't belong to the procession but seem to walk among the faithful. These figures, usually described as dressed in old-fashioned clothing, are seen at key moments of the journey, just when the emotion is at its peak. Witnesses claim that, when attempting to approach them, these figures disappear without a trace, as if they vanish into the air. In some of these accounts, witnesses even describe the sound of invisible footsteps, as if someone were walking beside them, and sometimes they feel an inexplicable chill in the air. Some of the more spiritual individuals interpret these apparitions as divine manifestations, signs that the presence of God or the saints is near. However, for others, these encounters remain an unexplained mystery that can only be attributed to the paranormal. Within the legends related to Holy Week processions, one of the most common myths is that of the ghostly penitents. It is said that, during the processions, especially on the night of the Easter Vigil, one can see penitents with covered faces walking among the crowd. However, there is something peculiar about these penitents. Many claim they are not human beings, but wandering spirits, the dead returning to fulfill their penance. This myth has its origins in medieval traditions and ancient beliefs about purgatory and the atonement of sins. In the Middle Ages, penitents who had committed serious sins were punished by walking through the streets during processions, wearing hooded robes, as a public act of penance. Over time, this practice was reduced, but the legends of ghostly penitents persisted, especially in regions of Europe and Latin America. It is said that these spirits return every year during Holy Week nights, seeking redemption for the sins committed in life. Accounts suggest that at certain moments of the procession, one can see these penitents walking silently, disappearing into the darkness. Some modern versions of this legend claim that these ghostly penitents do not seek redemption, but revenge. Throughout history, there have been people who have claimed to feel the presence of these spirits during the processions, and some even claim to have been touched by them. The sensation is the same, an absolute coldness, as if a frozen hand touched their shoulder amid the crowd, or as if someone were watching them from the darkness without being seen. In short, the connection between churches, processions, and the paranormal during Holy Week is one of the most fascinating and mysterious. The stories of shadows, ethereal figures, and inexplicable apparitions continue to feed the mystical atmosphere of these holy days. The devotion and emotion experienced during the processions and in the churches seem to act as a catalyst for the supernatural to manifest. While many of these phenomena may have rational explanations, the recurrence of testimonies and the intensity of the experiences lived by the believers leave the door open to doubt. Holy Week, more than just a religious ritual, becomes a space where the divine and the inexplicable meet, creating a unique atmosphere in which the boundaries between the worlds seem to fade. As we know, Holy Week is not just a time for religious reflection, devotion, and introspection. In many cultures, it is also a time when the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural blur. Throughout history, Holy Week has witnessed miracles, inexplicable phenomena, and events that challenge our logical understanding. Those who are devout, or even the most skeptical, find themselves somehow confronted with occurrences that seem to escape the laws of nature. From weeping religious images to inexplicable healing phenomena, what happens during Holy Week not only involves the sacred stories of the death and resurrection of Christ, but also tales of divine interventions that have left a deep mark on those who have experienced them. In this episode, we will explore some of the most well-known miracles and inexplicable events that have taken place during this sacred season, and see how these phenomena continue to be an integral part of popular beliefs, both for the faithful and for those who seek answers beyond what is visible. One of the most recurring and perplexing phenomena during Holy Week are the manifestations of religious objects that seem to bleed or cry, events that occur with surprising frequency during this time. Sacred images of virgins, saints, or Christ himself, as well as relics or certain liturgical objects, have become symbols of the divine due to these inexplicable manifestations. The most well-known of these manifestations is the appearance of tears on statues or religious figures. Throughout history, there have been documented cases where images of the Virgin Mary or Jesus Christ have wept during a period close to Holy Week. A famous case occurred in 1980 when the Virgin of Charity, an image venerated in Cuba, began to weep on Good Friday. Eyewitnesses reported that tears fell continuously from the statue's eyes, and many people interpreted this event as a sign of divine compassion, a call for humanity to repent of their sins. Such phenomena, which generally occur in renowned churches or sanctuaries, have left a profound impression on the religious community, which interprets them as a direct manifestation of the divine. Another related phenomenon, though even more unsettling, is that of statues or images that begin to bleed. During Holy Week, some religious figures, especially those representing the crucified Christ or the martyrs, have shown signs of blood. In 1982, in a church in Italy, a statue of the crucified Christ began to bleed from the hands and feet during Holy Week prayers. This event was witnessed by hundreds of people who were astonished and convinced that the Christ of the statue had experienced the Passion in an unusual way. In cases like this, the faithful interpret the phenomenon as confirmation of the divine presence and the connection between the religious figure and the suffering of Christ. There are numerous stories of images that bleed or weep, not only during Holy Week. However, during this time of year, when emotions are at their peak and churches are filled with religious fervor, the phenomena seem to intensify, creating an atmosphere of collective awe and deep reflection on the mysteries of faith. These occurrences have been documented worldwide, from Latin America to Europe, and continue to challenge skeptics. Many attempt to find scientific explanations, citing physical or chemical processes that could cause these effects. However, believers insist that these events are real miracles, tangible manifestations of God's presence on earth. Emotions, devotion, and faith in the divine seem to play a key role in these miracles, turning the inexplicable into proof of the supernatural. Over the centuries during Holy Week, many people have claimed to have witnessed miracles, not only through religious objects, but also through personal experiences that go beyond what is understandable. These stories of healing, divine protection, or answers to desperate prayers are repeated time and time again in faith communities, strengthening the belief in divine intervention during moments of great devotion. One of the most well-known stories is that of a man from Ecuador who, after a serious illness, went to a church in Quito during Holy Week, seeking a cure. Desperate, he prayed fervently before an image of the Virgin Mary. In the middle of his prayer, the man felt a warmth that spread through his body, a sensation of total relief, as if his illness had disappeared suddenly. At that very moment, he stood up from his seat, approached the image, and, surprisingly, noticed that the fever that had plagued him for weeks was vanishing. His testimony went viral in the community and was considered by many as a miracle. Stories like this are not uncommon during Holy Week. In many cases, The accounts involve immediate cures of serious illnesses or even accidents, in which the person not only survives but experiences a recovery that defies conventional medicine. For many, these events are proof that faith can overcome adversity in unimaginable ways. Another type of miracle related to Holy Week is the visions or dreams that many have experienced during this time. It is said that some people have had dreams in which they see religious figures giving them messages, offering comfort, or warning them about the future. These dreams are often so vivid that those who experience them feel they have received direct communication from the divine. Many interpret these dreams as a sign of hope, that they are not alone, that God is near, guiding them through difficult moments. These stories have been passed down through history, and it is common to find tales of people who claim to have been touched by the divine in moments of deep introspection, such as the vigils on Good Friday or the processions on Holy Saturday. Experiences of light, inexplicable warmth, or a deep sense of peace are attributed to a direct connection with the divine, a response to prayer that occurs mysteriously when the soul is most ready to receive it. Over the centuries, many of these miraculous phenomena have been documented, and although the testimonies are mostly subjective in nature, some of these cases have been verified and studied by scientists, theologians, and experts in paranormal phenomena. Some studies suggest that the concentration of emotional and spiritual energy during Holy Week may impact the perception of inexplicable phenomena. Science has also sought explanations based on collective suggestion or the psycho-emotional properties of individuals who participate in faith rituals. However, many of these phenomena continue to defy logic and rational explanation. One of the most fascinating aspects of these phenomena is the fact that they often occur in a very specific context. The dates of Holy Week, when the community is gathered in prayer and deep reflection. Many studies have suggested that, in moments of great collective fervor, people may experience extraordinary phenomena due to the collective psyche or the perception of alternate realities. However, despite efforts to rationalize these events, the stories remain a fundamental part of tradition and faith, especially during this time of year. Miracles and inexplicable events during Holy Week are an intrinsic part of the beliefs and stories that have marked religious tradition over the centuries. From the tears that flow from sacred images to the accounts of divine healings, these phenomena continue to fuel the faith and devotion of millions of people worldwide. What is truly astonishing is that, despite rationality and scientific advancement, miracles remain an essential part of the human experience, especially during Holy Week, when the divine seems closer than ever. No matter the explanation sought, what is clear is that Holy Week continues to be a period where the inexplicable and the sacred intertwine in a profound and mysterious way. If there is something that popular tradition has deeply associated with mystery, superstition, and the paranormal, it is the concept of haunted houses. And during Holy Week, when spiritual tensions are at their peak and beliefs in the divine and the dark merge, houses and old buildings acquire a special character, as if everything that happened there in the past resurfaces in the form of strange phenomena. It is common to hear stories of old mansions, ancestral homes, and, in some cases, even convents and monasteries that transform into settings for inexplicable phenomena that seem to be somehow linked to the beliefs of Holy Week. The connection between haunted houses and paranormal events during this time has deep roots in folklore and popular legends, where strange occurrences, invisible presences, and supernatural experiences seem to come to life more intensely in the days leading up to Easter. During these days, houses, often due to their history or the energy accumulated within, seem to transform into portals to other dimensions, where the ordinary dissolves into the supernatural. Let's dive into some of the most unsettling stories about houses that turn into settings for strange phenomena during Holy Week. Houses, especially old ones, carry a symbolic weight in the cultural traditions of many regions. In some places, it is believed that houses where tragedies, deaths, or traumatic events have occurred absorb an energy that cannot easily disappear. According to legends, these types of houses are the most likely to experience paranormal phenomena. When Holy Week arrives, a period filled with devotion and also forewarning, the presence of the supernatural in these houses seems to intensify, as if the energies accumulated over the years are unexpectedly released. One of the most well-known stories comes from an old house in northern Spain, where it is said that during Holy Week, the inhabitants experienced a series of strange phenomena. The residents claimed to hear footsteps on the stairs when no one was home, doors that would slam shut on their own, and sometimes lights that would turn off for no apparent reason. However, the most terrifying part of this story was the fact that during Easter week, many people claimed to have seen spectral figures of monks walking through the house. The figures, fully dressed in medieval robes, would disappear when looked at directly, leaving behind a chill in the air. In Latin America, there are frequent tales of houses that take on a special character during Holy Week. In Mexico, for example, there are stories of old colonial estates where people speak of hearing lamentations in the early morning hours of Holy Thursday, voices heard when no one is around, and lights turning on inexplicably. In many of these stories, the testimonies agree that paranormal activity intensifies during the dates of Holy Week, leading many to believe that the souls of those who died in the past, particularly during the days of sacrifice and pain of the crucifixion, remain trapped in these places, returning in search of something they cannot reach. A common legend told in various parts of Latin America speaks of houses that seem to come to life on Good Friday night. It is said that the walls of these houses whisper as if they want to reveal the secrets of those who once lived there. Witnesses claim that sometimes the furniture moves inexplicably, windows open and close by themselves, and the atmosphere grows heavy, as if an invisible presence were watching. In these types of stories, the houses become active characters, where the energies of the past resist resting and seem to want to communicate with the living. Stories of doors that open by themselves or close with a dull thud are some of the most common manifestations of haunted houses during Holy Week. These doors, which seem to have a life of their own, are often linked to presences that are not seen but are felt, and whose origin is often related to tragic deaths or unresolved events from the past. In several cities in Europe, such as Italy, cases have been documented where doors of old churches or historical buildings open and close for no apparent reason. At times, these doors seem to do so at key moments during Holy Week, as if responding to the intensity of the ritual. On some occasions, witnesses have heard loud lamentations coming from inside these houses or temples, especially during the early hours of Good Friday, when people gather for the vigil. The moans seem to come from dark hallways, basements, or closed rooms where no one should be. Sometimes, these wails are mistaken for the prayers of the faithful, but those who hear them realize they have a much more heartbreaking and sinister tone. One of the most striking testimonies was that of a family in the city of Toledo, Spain. During one Holy Week, they began to experience strange occurrences in their home. First, it was the sound of a door opening and closing by itself, which happened several times throughout the night. As the week progressed, the family members began to hear faint moans coming from the hallway, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the house. The family tried to ignore it, but the noises intensified until they became unbearable. During the Holy Thursday Mass, one of the family members passing through the hallway saw a shadow gliding along the corridor. After that event, the family decided to leave the house, convinced that an unknown presence was disturbing their home. In the case of a house in Buenos Aires, Argentina, the family reported a series of events that seemed to be directly related to Holy Week. During the early hours of Good Friday, the lights in the house began to flicker erratically, and the doors of the rooms opened by themselves. At first, the family thought it might be an electrical issue, but what happened next was even more unsettling. A family member claimed to have seen a figure in the hallway, dressed in old clothes, who disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. This experience left a deep mark on them, and after investigating, they discovered that the house had once been a convent in colonial times, where a murder had occurred during a religious dispute. Stories of haunted houses and strange presences during Holy Week are deeply connected to ancient popular beliefs and spiritual traditions. In many cultures, it is believed that the souls of the dead return to earth during Holy Week, seeking rest, redemption, or revenge. Houses, especially those that have witnessed tragic events, are seen as places where these souls can become trapped, unable to find peace. This belief is related to the Catholic tradition of purgatory, which holds that the souls of the dead who are not ready to enter heaven must go through a period of purification. In popular culture, especially in the Latin American context, houses that have been the site of betrayals, violent deaths, or injustices are considered cursed. It is believed that during Holy Week, when spiritual energy is at its peak and devotion is at its highest, the souls of the dead return to assert their rights, whether by seeking justice or trying to resolve unfinished business. This return of the dead, especially at such significant times as Holy Week, makes paranormal phenomena more intense. In Spain, for example, it is common to hear about houses around cities like Seville or Granada that, during Holy Week, seem to experience a rebirth of their dark pasts. Legends speak of the presence of monks, saints, and people who, in life, were devout but, for some reason, became trapped in limbo, seeking redemption or peace. Haunted houses and the legends associated with Holy Week represent an integral part of the mythology and folklore of many cultures. Whether in the old manor houses of Latin America or in the churches and monasteries of Europe, stories of inexplicable presences, doors that open by themselves, and shadows gliding through corridors continue to feed the mystery that surrounds this time of year. The popular belief that the souls of the dead return during Holy Week and that places steeped in history are points of contact between the visible and the invisible shapes these narratives. The stories continue to be told from generation to generation, keeping the connection between the divine and the spectral alive, making every old house and historic building potentially a portal to the supernatural during the holiest days of the Christian calendar. Before we move on to the next topic, I'd like to remind you that if you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and of course, subscribe to our channel. This way, you won't miss any of our upcoming episodes, which continue to explore the most unsettling mysteries that surround us. Your support is essential, so we can keep bringing content like this. Now, let's return to the topic at hand. Holy Week is a period of deep reflection and spirituality, but also a time when legends, myths, and paranormal stories emerge with strength. While religious figures and mystical experiences take center stage during this season, there are other types of stories that remain part of this tradition. We are talking about creatures and nocturnal presences that, according to legends, emerge from the shadows during Holy Week, especially on the darkest days of Easter. It is fascinating how, in many cultures, Holy Week is not only marked by the remembrance of the Passion of Christ, but also by the presence of creatures that seem to belong to another world, to a space that can only be understood within the context of faith and the supernatural. From the headless rider to the specters that walk the roads during the Easter Vigil, These legends not only speak to us of the unknown, but also of what humanity has feared for centuries. What hides in the darkness and stillness of the night? One of the most well-known stories associated with Holy Week in various cultures is that of the Headless Horseman. This legend, which has been told in different versions over the centuries, has its roots in European tradition, particularly in the folklore of the Middle Ages. According to the legend, the Headless Horseman is the spirit of a man who died violently and upon returning from the beyond, seeks vengeance or redemption, depending on the interpretation given. Although the story of the Headless Horseman is most famous in English-speaking countries, particularly thanks to Washington Irving's famous work, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, this figure also has its version in the folklore of many regions in Europe and Latin America. In particular, in some Spanish-speaking countries, it is said that during Holy Week, especially on the darkest nights, this rider appears on rural roads, often riding a horse as black as night, headless, with an aura of terror surrounding him. The Headless Horseman is a figure that evokes terror and mystery. On Holy Week nights, his appearance is believed to be an omen of bad luck, something related to the punishment for sins committed. Some stories suggest that the rider seeks out those who have committed a serious offense, as if he were an agent of justice, and his appearance is interpreted as a reminder of the fragility of life and the consequences of wrong actions. The legend varies depending on where it is told, but one constant is the sinister aura that surrounds the rider. It is said that the lost head was severed during a battle, a reckoning with dark forces, or an act of violence, and that, since his death, the spirit seeks to wander the world of the living, looking for those who have not yet atoned for their own wrongdoings. During Holy Week, when the atmosphere of reflection and spiritual contemplation takes hold of towns and cities, the stories of the Headless Horseman resonate more strongly. The shadows of the night seem to grow thicker, and the feeling that something lurks beyond what is visible becomes palpable. It is during this time that the stories of encounters with this creature reach their peak, and the legends are reawakened in families and communities, especially among those who believe that, in these days, the supernatural is more present than ever. Another phenomenon associated with Holy Week is the appearance of specters on roads and mountains, especially during the Easter Vigil, that special night of reflection and waiting. During this period, it is common for the faithful to gather to pray, reflect, and keep vigil until the arrival of Christ's resurrection. However, for some, this night is not only marked by silence and prayer, but also by the appearance of entities that seem to emerge from the shadows, defying human understanding. The legend tells that in the mountains near certain villages or on rural roads that pass through solitary forests, the spirits of the dead return during the Easter Vigil, wandering as if they are still searching for the path to eternal rest. These specters are not necessarily malicious, but rather lost souls that have not found peace and, for some reason, feel drawn to the charged atmosphere of Holy Week. Some versions of these legends suggest that these spirits are those who died without receiving the final blessing, unable to be redeemed, and are now trapped in a spiritual limbo, wandering the earth. People who have walked these paths on Holy Week nights claim to have heard whispering voices coming from the darkness, unexplained noises, or even seen shadowy figures moving among the trees. The most chilling stories speak of travelers who, while walking on solitary trails during the vigil, have encountered spectral figures that seem to want to guide them or, at the very least, make their presence felt. Some witnesses claim that, upon approaching these figures, they disappear in the blink of an eye, as if they had never been there. There are versions of the legend that state that some of these specters are the souls of people who were devout in life but died before reaching salvation. In this sense, Holy Week becomes a key period for these wandering souls, as it is believed that during these holy days, the gates of heaven open a little wider, giving these souls a final chance to find peace. Thus, the presence of these spectral figures on earth is interpreted by some as a sign that the resurrection affects not only the living, but also the dead. While specters and ghosts are common in many Holy Week legends, they are not the only presences said to emerge during these sacred days. In various cultures, especially in rural and isolated areas, there are tales of mythical creatures that make their appearance during Holy Week, taking advantage of the period of reflection and prayer to manifest themselves. These creatures, which in many cases represent evil or forces beyond our control, are believed to be attracted by the spiritual energy of the season. In some regions of Latin America, for example, the legend of the Tío Cuento is told. This being appears during Holy Week as a large, hairy creature with glowing red eyes, walking on the darkest, most solitary paths. This creature is seen as a nocturnal entity that preys on those who venture too close to the mountains or forests, and its appearance is surrounded by dark omens. It is believed that Tío Cuento seeks out those who are far from faith, those who feel empty in spirit, and who, instead of praying during the days of reflection, give in to idleness or bad actions. Tío Cuento is not the only being of its kind. In other places, figures like the Cuco are mentioned, a creature said to appear to disobedient children on Holy Week nights, dragging them into the forest if they do not behave. This being, often described as a specter, has the mission of frightening children to teach them the importance of penance and obedience. The nocturnal creatures and presences associated with Holy Week are a reflection of the fear and fascination that this time of year awakens in humans. From the headless rider who rides in the darkness, to the specters that wander on solitary roads, to the mythical creatures that awaken in the forests and mountains, these legends not only fuel popular imagination, but also show the deep connection between faith, the supernatural, and ancient fear. Each of these stories holds a profound meaning related to redemption, justice, and the balance between good and evil. Holy Week is undoubtedly a time when divine and the dark intertwine, and when mystery seems more present than ever. So far, we have explored some of the most well-known legends and myths associated with Holy Week. Spectral apparitions, haunted houses, creatures emerging from the darkness, and much more. But, as is often the case when we talk about the supernatural, the legends and stories are not always just part of traditional tales. The reality is that many people, in various parts of the world, claim to have had paranormal encounters during Holy Week, situations that go beyond mere superstition and often leave them marked for life. At this point in the episode, I want to dive into the stories and personal experiences of our listeners and those who have shared their encounters with us over the years. These stories are the foundation of what we could call real-life experiences, accounts of people who have witnessed inexplicable phenomena during Holy Week. And just like the myths we've explored so far, they cannot be easily dismissed. The most fascinating aspect of these testimonies is that they come from ordinary people with stories that don't seem to have any connection to the world of mystery, but that, in the context of Holy Week, find themselves involved in situations they cannot understand or explain. These are accounts of encounters with the paranormal, of inexplicable events that challenge logic, and which, when shared, invite us to reflect on what truly happens during these days charged with spiritual and religious meaning. Over the years, we have received numerous testimonies from listeners who have shared their personal experiences during Holy Week. Stories ranging from simple sensations of unexplained cold to direct encounters with presences that should not be there. These are some of the most impactful stories that have been shared with us. One of the most recent stories comes from a listener in Mexico who told us a terrifying experience that took place during a Holy Week vigil in his town. The story comes from a family that, like many others, gathers to pray and maintain tradition during the holy days. During the Good Friday vigil, while praying in the town's church, they began to hear a strange sound coming from the altar. At first, they thought it was one of the candles going out or some normal noise in the empty church. However, as they approached, they saw that one of the statues of the Virgin Mary, which was on the altar, began to slowly move. At first, they thought it was an illusion, but as the statue leaned to one side, several family members began to feel an intense cold that couldn't be explained. The strangest part was that when they tried to get closer to verify what was happening, the statue returned to its original position, as if it had never moved. No one could give a logical explanation. And from that moment on, the family members felt deeply disturbed, with the sensation that something inexplicable had manifested at that sacred moment. Another testimony came from Peru, describing an experience that a young man had during Holy Week in a small rural town. In this case, the story takes place in an old church that was practically uninhabited, except for a handful of people who gathered for the Holy Week Masses. One night during the Easter Vigil, the young man decided to attend Mass alone, seeking a moment of peace. When he entered the empty church, he noticed that the atmosphere was strangely silent. However, when he approached the altar, he began to hear a series of whispers coming from within the church. At first, he thought it could be other people, but when he looked around, he saw that he was completely alone. The whispers intensified and began to form words that he could not understand, as if someone was trying to communicate with him. When he tried to approach the altar, a strong gust of wind slammed the church door shut, trapping him inside. The young man, scared, began to pray, and at that moment the whispers ceased. The door suddenly opened, and when he exited, he saw several people who had arrived for the Mass. However, what surprised him the most was that when he asked them, no one had heard anything. It was that experience that left him marked forever, convinced that something inexplicable had happened in that sacred place. These stories show us a fascinating and terrifying side of what happens during Holy Week, when the spiritual energy of the dates seems to open the doors to the supernatural. In each account, there is a common feeling, a sense that the paranormal is not just a matter of made-up stories, but encounters that feel so real they challenge our understanding. Beyond the testimonies that come to us more spontaneously, we also have impactful stories sent to us by people seeking to understand what they experienced, and, in many cases, trying to make sense of what happened during Holy Week. These stories share something in common: the deep transformation they leave in those who experience them, as if these events not only affect their perception of what is possible, but also their understanding of spirituality, faith, and what happens after death. One of the most chilling stories was shared by a listener from Colombia, who, during Holy Week, decided to visit some friends in a village far from the city. Upon arrival, he found an old house that belonged to one of his friend's family, which had been restored in recent years, but still retained its old character. On the night of Good Friday, while having dinner and talking in the main room, they began to hear strange noises coming from the upper floor. They thought it was normal sounds in an old house, but what happened next left them frozen. In the middle of their conversation, one of the bedroom doors opened violently, and they heard the sound of heavy footsteps on the wooden floor. When the door closed, the friends stared in astonishment, knowing that no one else was in the house. They decided to investigate, and upon heading to the second floor, found a room that was completely closed. When they opened the door, they found the room in total darkness, with no sign of anything that could have caused the noise. At first, they thought someone was playing a prank, but fear overwhelmed them when they noticed that an old wooden cross which had been on a table, had fallen to the ground. It was that moment that made them feel that, in the stillness of the Holy Week night, something inexplicable had taken place in that house. Another fascinating testimony comes from Chile, where a woman recounts an experience she had while visiting a monastery in the south of the country during Holy Week. In her story, she tells us that while taking a nighttime walk through the monastery grounds, she noticed a figure on the horizon, near an old abandoned chapel. The figure, which she initially thought could be a monk, began to approach. But when she looked closer, she realized that the figure was completely illuminated by a strange light that seemed to emanate from the ground. When she tried to get closer, the figure disappeared right before her eyes, leaving her speechless. Despite trying to find some logical explanation for what she had seen, she couldn't. The light she saw, the figure, and the disappearance were so intense that the woman was deeply moved by what happened. And since that day, she has considered her experience to be a kind of divine message. Listening to these stories and testimonies, one realizes that the paranormal, when experienced firsthand, leaves an indelible mark on the lives of those who live it. Whether it's the feeling of being in the presence of an invisible entity or a clear manifestation of the supernatural, these experiences change the way people perceive the world around them. Holy Week, with its spiritual and emotional weight, seems to be a key moment when these experiences occur more frequently, and often, those who experience them end up altering their relationship with faith and the inexplicable. The experiences of our listeners are not just horror stories, but deeply human accounts that touch the core of spirituality, fear, and reflection on what lies beyond our understanding. These experiences not only impact those who live them, but also those who hear them, as they make us question the boundaries between the real and the supernatural, and invite us to be more aware of what truly happens during those special days of reflection and faith. As always, if you have a story to share, whether it's about paranormal encounters during Holy Week or any other mystery you've experienced, don't hesitate to leave us your comments. We'd love to hear your experience and share it in future episodes. We want to know what you think about everything we've discussed, and more importantly, if you've had any paranormal encounters during Holy Week that you'd like to share with us. Now, let's move on to the closing of this special and reflect together. We have reached the end of this journey through the supernatural in Holy Week. But before closing this episode, I want to take a moment to reflect on everything we've explored. Throughout this journey, we've seen how spirituality and the paranormal intertwine in a unique and mysterious way during these holy days. From spectral apparitions in churches to the shocking testimonies of people who have lived the inexplicable, Holy Week, as a period of great spiritual weight, seems to offer a door to another world, a world where the sacred and the inexplicable meet on such a fine line that we don't know if we're witnessing the divine, the demonic, or the completely unknown. The connection between the sacred and the paranormal is not something new. In fact, many cultures and traditions have spoken of extraordinary phenomena that occur at times of great religious or spiritual significance. And Holy Week has been one of the richest periods in stories that cross that line between the human and the divine, the visible and the invisible. What is fascinating is that, although these events are often presented as something out of the ordinary, at the same time they invite us to question the very nature of our existence, our faith, and our beliefs. Fear, uncertainty, faith, devotion, and the supernatural intertwine during Holy Week in a way that often challenges our understanding. People who have witnessed these phenomena often speak of them with a mixture of awe and respect, because they know they have experienced something that defies the natural and logical laws that govern our everyday lives. And although many of these stories may seem like mere legends or superstitions, the truth is that, deep down, They are part of something much greater, something tied to our beliefs, our emotions, and the deepest part of our soul. Holy Week, with its symbolism of death, sacrifice, resurrection, and rebirth, seems to be a privileged time for these invisible energies to manifest. The legends of nocturnal creatures, apparitions in churches, haunted houses, or religious objects behaving strangely, all form part of a fabric of popular beliefs that have endured for centuries, and that still today remain an essential part of the folklore of many cultures around the world. Of course, not all paranormal stories have a religious or spiritual meaning. Some are simply inexplicable. But when they occur in this particular context, they take on an emotional and symbolic charge that makes them even more powerful. Holy Week, as a time of reflection and introspection, seems to open doors to the unknown, creating a bridge between the visible and the invisible, between the tangible and the intangible. These moments of introspection and devotion may be the key for the inexplicable to make itself present in our lives. Or perhaps it is our very faith that makes it possible for the impossible to become real. I would like to invite you to reflect on what we've explored in this episode. Perhaps, by thinking about your own beliefs or experiences, you may have also had encounters with the inexplicable in the past. Or perhaps you're starting to see legends and myths in a new way. The stories of Holy Week, both those we've shared and those you may have heard in your own communities, remind us that there is much more than what we can see, and that what we think we know about the world may only be scratching the surface of a much deeper and more mysterious reality. And in the end, the paranormal has a unique way of affecting our lives. Sometimes stories of the supernatural scare us, confuse us, or even fill us with fear. But on many occasions, they also connect us with something greater than ourselves, with an energy that we do not fully understand, but we know is there, watching us from the shadows. And that perhaps is what attracts us the most. The unknown, the unsettling, what we cannot control, but what we feel deeply. I don't want to say goodbye without first thanking you from the bottom of my heart for joining us in this very special episode. It has been a fascinating journey through the mysteries surrounding Holy Week, and your active participation, your comments, and your interest are what motivate us to keep exploring these topics, week after week. This episode has been just a small sample of everything that is out there, waiting to be discovered and understood. Holy Week, with its symbolic weight, remains a time of reflection and, in many cases, a time when the paranormal becomes more visible. Perhaps the mystery will never stop fascinating us, and maybe there will always be something more to discover. If you enjoyed this episode, I invite you to leave a like, subscribe so you don't miss upcoming episodes, and share your own experiences in the comments. If you've had paranormal encounters during Holy Week, or at any other time, we'd love to read your stories. By sharing them, you not only help enrich the conversation, but you also create a community of people who, just like you, feel a deep curiosity for the inexplicable. Remember, dear listeners, that the paranormal is always present, sometimes in an obvious way, other times in a subtle form, but it is always there, waiting to be discovered. So, as we continue on this journey, I invite you to keep reflecting on what we've discussed today, to open your eyes and hearts to the mysteries that surround us, and to never stop exploring what lies beyond what we can see. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Shadows of Fear, and we'll see you again very soon with more stories that will challenge your understanding of reality. Until next time, and may the shadows of fear continue to accompany you.